Welcome friends to Living Large on Little. Today I'm going to show you how to turn a pumpkin into a jack-o'-lantern and a jack-o'-lantern into a pumpkin pie. So let's get started. I'm cutting this cute little pumpkin not to be a work of art, just to be a demonstration so that you can see how to do it. But I do have a couple of tips. Make sure that when you cut the hat off your pumpkin that you cut it at a little bit of an angle pointing toward the middle so that it doesn't fall straight down into the pumpkin after you do it. And I also cut a little notch in the cap and in the pumpkin itself so that I can match those up and I don't have to spin the cap to try to figure out how it fits. The tool that I'm using is a little kit that I bought at the dollar store for pumpkin carving, and it has a paddle that is a little bit sharp for scraping out the insides, and then a very deeply coarsely serrated knife. I hope that you are a more artistic pumpkin carver than I am, but you get the idea. And it doesn't matter that the marker is going to be on there because most of that will be cut off anyway. And then when I go to cook the pumpkin, if there's any of it left, I'll just cut that off because you don't really want the marker in your cooked pumpkin after the fact. So these are little pumpkins that I grew in my yard. I got the seed from a big pumpkin that I got last year at the grocery store, and it was so sweet and so nice that I decided to grow that same variety and ended up with tons and tons of pumpkins, although none of them were as big as that one. But the good news is that they're very, very flavorful and nice. They're really nice, sweet pumpkins, so they make great pies. Okay, now we're assuming that Halloween is over, and if you used one of those little artificial candles that you can get at the dollar store, by half a dozen of them for $1, you realize that the pumpkin is not going to be burned on the inside. But if you use a real candle, you may have wax and the top will probably be burned. So if you did use a real candle, just pick out the wax. And don't worry about the fact that it's a little bit burned. If it's blackened in some places, then cut that part out. But now I'm going to use this jack-o'-lantern to make pumpkin pie, pumpkin bread. So the first thing to do is to turn it into a puree. So I'm cutting up the lid and I'm putting it in a pressure cooker because that's quickest. But if you don't have a pressure cooker, a big canner like this, an electric pressure cooker is great, but if you don't have something like that, you can use it in any kind of a pot. So the trick is now to see this nice fresh pumpkin. I'm going to cut it up into just chunks. It doesn't have to be any particular size or shape. I'm just going to cut it up into chunks so that I can get the whole pumpkin into the pressure cooker at once. That's part of the reason I chose this size of the pumpkin. We had a banner year for pumpkins in our garden this year because last year we didn't get any, so I planted them everywhere I could find a little niche, and we ended up with 22 pumpkins. And we've already given some of them away, and we still have some that are growing, but they're not ripe yet. I'm cutting off the part where I blackened the tooth. Anywhere where there's a little bit of marker, I don't really want that in my pumpkin puree. So that goes. This is a good sharp knife, but of course be careful. So we'll just pop that in there. You don't need to worry about, this has a little bit of rug burn on it on the bottom where it was sitting against the ground. You don't really need to worry about that because you can take it off, you can just peel off that part very easily once it's cooked. You'll note I'm not taking off the skin. Heavens no, this bright orange part is the highest in vitamin A of the entire fruit. So that's how much that pumpkin filled this 12-quart pressure canner. And so I'm going to add a pitcher of water. There's a rack in the bottom of it because I don't really want the pumpkin sitting in water. It's going to produce a lot of liquid itself. So I'm just putting in about a 1/2 inch, and I'll pop the lid on. I will process this for 10 minutes once it starts processing, and so and then it'll be perfect, and I'll come back to you when I get to that point. All right, this pumpkin has had plenty of time to finish, and the pot has cooled off enough to open it. If you're using a regular steamer or just a big pot, you'll be able to test it and see that the pumpkin is very tender. Mr. Jack-o'-lantern enjoyed his steam bath. And I'm just going to pick up these chunks of pumpkin, making sure that I'm not getting the one that had a little bit of a scruffy part on it. And I'm loading them into my blender bottle. And obviously there is nothing complicated about this. I'm just going to blend up this steamed pumpkin until it's good and smooth. That's about 2/3 of it right there. I'm making 2 pies, and so I want a total of 4 cups of the pumpkin puree. So now you can see through the blender bottle that there are still bits of the bright orange peel in there, and so we want to blend it until those have pretty well gone away. So this is all pureed. You can see that it's looser. It's a little bit more liquid than the canned solid packed pumpkin that you're going to buy in the store. But we're going to accommodate for that, because it always will be a little bit more dense unless you drain it and kind of squeeze it out after it's cool. But I don't usually do that because it works just fine to do it this way. 4 cups of the pumpkin puree goes into the bowl. And then we're going to add 2 tablespoons of flour. Now that's going to help make up for the soupiness of the home pureed pumpkin. Then 1.5 cups of sugar, just plain old white sugar. And 4 eggs, large eggs that is. This is going to be enough for 2 large pies, pumpkin pies. So I'm going to whisk that in a little bit. Now I'm going to add 1/2 teaspoon of salt. Forgive me for using my palm measurement, but it's pretty accurate. I'm going to add 2 teaspoons of ground vanilla, cinnamon, not vanilla. There's 1, whoops, a little bit too much, 2. I'm going to add 1/2 teaspoon of ground ginger, generous 1/2 teaspoon, a 1/4 teaspoon of ground cloves. That cinnamon I inhaled it a little bit. Go light on the cloves, they are very strong. And then about 1/2 teaspoon of ground nutmeg. So those are the spices. We've got the salt in there already. So blend those in. Then it says right on the can to shake it up, so I'm going to shake up this evaporated milk. So I'm going to we'll dump this evaporated milk into the can. Out of the can. It's all shaken up. I'm going to cut a little slot in the back of it too, so that it pours more readily. And open a little bit of a spout with my knife. I know there are little can openers that are made specifically for that, but rather than hunt it down when I don't use it very often, this works just fine. So this is 2 full 12-ounce cans of the evaporated milk. Not sweetened condensed milk, but evaporated milk. And we're going to mix this in really well. You can see it's pretty soupy. In fact, this pumpkin seems to have been a little bit wetter than they usually are. I think I'm going to add an extra egg just to help bind it together. Whoop. We'll whisk in one more egg. All right, so don't be alarmed that it's really running like that. The milk and the eggs will help it set up like a proper custard should. Okay, here is the first of my 2 pie crusts. I'm just going to double check and make sure there are no holes in the bottom, because you don't want it seeping down under. Here's the second one that I prepared off camera. And now I'm going to scoop this up into the pie. In fact, I'm going to get it really close because I really don't want to drip it on the edge where it will burn. Now, the way that you bake pumpkin pies is that you heat the oven to 475 or 425, and you bake them for 15 minutes at that high heat. And then you turn the oven down and bake it for another 40 minutes or so, depending on how long it takes, until the middle is set at 350 degrees. So I have another pie in the oven already, and I will bake these as soon as that one is done. So fill it up just below the rim of the crimp. That looks just right. Okay, we'll get this one filled. Maybe I can dump it. These are 2 very large deep dish pie crusts, and so I'm going to have a little bit left over, but that's fine. Okay, so these are going to go in. I'm going to preheat my oven to 425. I will bake them for 15 minutes, and I'll turn down the heat and bake them for about 40 more minutes, 40 to 45 more minutes on 350, and I'll come back to you and show you how Jack turned out.